Welcome to Care Vision's Family Talk, a space dedicated to exploring the challenges of raising children in today's world. I'm Dr Linda de Caestecker, and each episode I chat with a guest and we dive into the real-life struggles faced by children and their carers. We will offer insights and practical guidance to help families feel understood, supported, and hopeful. Whether you're a parent, foster carer, grandparent, or anyone supporting the young people in your life, this is the place for you. Well, good afternoon. Let's get started. And I'm really pleased that you've all come for this Care Vision's Family Talk. As many of you will know, we've been having a series of these online, and I've been interviewing people, but I've really enjoyed them and found them very helpful. And this is the first one we've done that's live. So you're very honoured to be part of this live event, and we're very honoured and happy that you've come along to that. We're looking today at protecting young people, we've said, from harmful online content, but we're actually going to look broader than that, because we've got both Alexis and Lyndsay here, and they're going to not just talk about online abuse and exploitation, but wider than that. How do we protect our young people from that wider, particularly sexual exploitation? I'll introduce us all in a minute, but I just want to start with some very practical points, which is the toilets are out there if you're looking for them. There isn't going to be a fire alarm, so if the fire alarm does go off, you can see the green sign over there, and if we go out there and outside, and Jeff will lead us out if the fire alarm goes off. Also to say, please switch your mobile phones to silent or off if you can, unless you're waiting for a very, very urgent call. And lastly, there are feedback forms for you to complete. Hopefully you've got them. What we really want to do from this first event is learn from it, as well as hopefully you'll find it very useful. But if there's things you think, oh, you could have done that better, don't be afraid to say. Tell us what you think of the venue. Tell us what you think of the audio and anything else that you want to feed back to us that we might be able to improve or make better for future events. So just to start with, I'm Linda de Caestecker. I work particularly with the Why Not Trust, but also with the Care Visions team. And as I say, it's been fantastic honour to be able to be part of these family talks. I am a public health doctor, particularly worked in the field of children and young people, but I'm the generalist. I'm not the expert in these matters. I do realise this is quite a difficult topic to talk about and think about. For some of you, it could be quite sensitive or even troubling or upsetting, either because of your own background or your family or people you know. So it's just to say, if you do find anything we talk about difficult or upsetting, please just feel free to leave for a minute and come back. And we've got David here. David, raise your hand if you do want to talk to anybody about some of these issues and how they've made you feel. So I'm going to now sit back down and we'll continue this panel discussion. But I'll start with asking each of the panelists to introduce themselves. So first of all, Professor Alexis Jay, do you want to tell us who you are, why you're here, and what your interest is in this topic?
Okay. Thank you very much, Linda. Can everybody hear me all right? Good. I'm a social worker. I worked in local government for over 30 years, and almost exclusively in the west of Scotland in a variety of places. And latterly I was Director of Social Work and Housing in Western Bartonshire. Then was asked to set up the Social Work Inspection Agency, which I enjoyed very much, doing it from scratch, and did that until we were amalgamated with another organ, the Care Commission as was. So I did that for a while, and actually, when I decided I was going to do something different, I think it's called retirement, but it didn't quite work out like that. But I was invited to carry out a major review in the Northern Metropolitan Borough of Rotherham in 2013-14, which was on the subject of child sexual exploitation over the previous 16 years. And I did that and was absolutely astonished by how it attracted worldwide attention, not simply local or even UK attention, because we did establish a small team, myself and 2 others. We did establish that there were actually a minimum of 1,400 victims of child sexual exploitation over that period of time, which was a shock to everyone. And people often asked about how you reached that figure, and say, well, we started off with nearly 1,000 cases that the police had already identified, and the rest, or many of it, were confirmed through file reading and minutes, the reading of minutes, and carrying out many, many, many interviews, including with young people. After that, I'll skip over it, but the following year I was asked to join the national public inquiry formally set up by Theresa May, first as a panel member, and then after some difficulties with the chair who had been appointed, I was asked to chair it. So for 7 years I chaired the public inquiry into child sexual abuse in England and Wales, and we produced a number of what we called investigation reports as we went along. And after the final report was published in 2022, regrettably on the same day as Liz Truss resigned, which didn't help the coverage. But after that, I spent most of the following nearly 2 years pressing the then administration to implement the recommendations, which was an uphill task. There has been some progress, of course, since the new government came into being from July of last year, and some progress has been made, but there's still much to do around all of the aspects of child sexual abuse and exploitation. So I think that's probably enough for me.
Thank you. So Lyndsay McDade is from Crimestoppers. Lyndsay, tell us about yourself.
Yeah, so Crimestoppers is an independent charity, and I've been there for, 9 years now. I manage their youth service, Fearless. And Fearless, similar to Crimestoppers, is about helping young people from sort of primary 7 going into first year, that sort of transition phase, all the way through beyond high school and into sort of college and wider life when they become adults. And it's about helping those young people to understand more information about crime, understand the impact of crime, and understand enough that they can hopefully make some safer, kind of positive choices. Be that to avoid crime and getting involved in that themselves, or to speak up about crime, which is that sort of bread and butter element of Crimestoppers. Young people, not victims of crime, but those kind of third-party witnesses of crime, can report information to us 100% anonymously about lots of different crime types. So my job is to sort of raise awareness of that. It's a predominantly comms job these days. It's about helping young people to know that information that will hopefully keep them safe, and the importance of speaking up. And then in terms of today, the Scottish Government and Police Scotland had approached me last year, sort of around springtime last year, to say that they really wanted to run a sextortion campaign for young people. And at that point, it was just meant to be for teenagers. But like all of our campaigns, we go to young people themselves and have them help us to design the message. Co-production's this big buzzword, everyone's doing co-production. But it's quite genuinely quite meaningful, the work that we do with young people, to really understand understand, what do you know about this? What do we need to help you to understand about this? What are the kind of the key barriers to reporting or speaking up or learning more? And so we worked with a group of various groups of young people. I think it was 6 groups in total across Scotland, all with lots of different backgrounds and different sort of interests and what have you. And they helped develop our sextortion campaign that ran from November into December, and then from February to March. We're going into the 3rd phase on Monday. We're launching a new resource for schools. So I was saying to Alexis before we start, I'm in no way very much like I'm very much a generalist. I'm not an expert. I don't have a background in policing. I've always worked in the third sector, all kind of youth charities. But what I can do, and what I've lived the past year constantly talking about sextortion, and importantly having an understanding of where young people are at with the topic. And I think that's really important when it comes to what we as adults and as professionals know. It's all well and good us knowing information, but if that's not what resonates with young people, then we're sort of on to a losing battle. So that's why I've been very kindly invited.
So just remind us, what do we mean by sextortion?
So lots of people, do you know, it's interesting, whether you talk to young people or whether you talk to adults, lots of people have lots of different ideas about what sextortion is. And sometimes they just think it is this thing that happens online. They don't really understand that it's quite niche and it's quite focused. Sextortion is when criminals threaten to share nude or semi-nude images, predominantly to a young person's social media. If that young person, or adult, because of course it can happen to adults as well, if their victim fails to send them money or fails to comply with some other harmful demand. Now, that image might have started off as an image that had been shared and it's a real image of their victim, or sometimes it can be AI produced for the purpose of blackmail. So that's what sextortion is. So that's what the campaign's been very much focused on. But of course, there's far wider forms of online exploitation out there. But that's what the campaign focused on.
And we know a lot more about sexual exploitation since the report that you did in Rotherham, but other reports. Is it more common? I mean, it seems to be talked about more. Is it happening more often?
Well, the most important thing to say about that is there are completely inconsistent data and sources. Nobody counts it the same way across the UK. And that's a huge problem, because it's not just a technicality about this, because how you define something often determines whether or not you get certain services. And that is a major problem. It's one of the recommendations we made about data sets and how police and social services in particular need to be consistent. There needs to be a single core data set that everybody uses, and that's no mean task. But I wonder if I could just mention a little about child sexual exploitation, just so that we're all understanding the context of this. It's a unique feature of this is that children are coerced, manipulated, or deceived into sexual activity with multiple abusers, and that almost always means 2 or more persons. It is not sexual abuse in a family context. It usually happens out with the family context that includes family members and a friendship network. Normally that would be the case, unless of course there is a parent or other family member who is complicit in the sexual abuse, and that unfortunately can happen as well. It cuts across class, because people mistakenly believe at times that this is only something that applies to so-called poor families and in certain areas, and that's absolutely not the case. It is important to note that, because it occurs in the most exclusive public schools, and it happens in care homes and in foster care as well. But this is not something that's dominated by class origins. And finally, just to say something about the clear risks and vulnerabilities. The research isn't particularly good on this, but it has identified 2 sources that unequivocally, I should say, these are being in residential care, and also the presence of a disability. And the latter is particularly problematic where the disability means that that child, an under 18-year-old, cannot communicate either verbally or in any other way because of the nature of the disability they have, so they're particularly vulnerable. That doesn't mean that there aren't other vulnerabilities and indicators of risk. We can come talk about that later. But these are the two that are that have been fully and accepted. Research has shown to be the case.
Yeah. And in sextortion, it's maybe a bit different in terms of who's most at risk.
So in the case of sextortion, quite often, of course, the criminal can be from the UK. They can be someone they know. Who knows? Everything's constantly developing when it comes to sextortion. But quite often, sextortion comes from a serious organised crime group abroad. They're sort of placed in lots of different countries abroad, and it's most definitely an international threat to young people and adults, of course. So quite often it's a kind of scattergun effect. The people are sending, there's a sort of such an organised element to the international side of sextortion. You're talking about contact centres or call centres where people are there with a core job of sending out these messages, having conversations on social media, sending out sort of phishing messages on social media, sending out images that are most definitely not of themselves, but maybe of pretty girls that they've AI created or they've taken off socials, or of young, handsome young men that maybe they'll send instead. So it can be a scattergun effect where they send that out and they send those messages right out. So it's not always targeted on particular children. So absolutely similarly, it's not focused on a certain young person because of their background or anything like that. It's sent out to everyone, but it's how that young person responds to that message that I guess becomes a kind of problematic part. Will that young person respond and think that that person trying to chat them up online is sincere in that? Or will they begin to see that maybe there's a reason for that, and if it's too good to be true, then it's probably isn't what the young person thinks it is or what it's kind of coming across. So for sextortion, very much according to the Internet Watch Foundation, about 91% of the victims that they saw in 2023, 91% were young males. And quite often when you talk to people about that, they automatically assume that girls will be the victim. And I think that says a lot about how we see our young men and the fact that they can be victims of things too. And I think there's a lot of work that we could be doing in that sort of field to really see young men and their vulnerabilities and how we support them and what their needs are. And of that 91% being male, around 60% were aged between 16 and 17. So you've got a real clear demographic of young people who are victim of sextortion, and whether that's because they're more likely to respond or whether that's because the criminals are sending them predominantly to males. It's very difficult to kind of break that down and understand the reasons why. But we are, over the last sort of year or so, there's definitely a sort of troubling trend where we're seeing younger people becoming victim of sextortion, young as 11 in some cases. And I saw a younger one in the press a couple of weeks ago, and also young girls being approached as well. So it's most definitely not just your teenage boys, but they are for sure, they seem to be most at risk.
And as parents and carers, and I'll ask Alexis the same type of question, what might be some of the warning signs that we might be looking for in our young people?
Do you know, I think it's really tricky because quite often these things can happen very, very fast. A young person starts talking to someone on social media, images are shared, and then they get that request for sextortion. So they're getting told, we're going to share this image of you to all your social media platforms because we know your Facebook, we know your Insta, we know your Snapchat, we know your TikTok. We're going to share this really intimate image of you on all those platforms so all your friends see, all your family members see. If you don't send us, an Apple gift card, the big long number on a gift card, or if you don't comply with some other demand. And quite often there isn't warning signs because that can happen in such a short period of time. I think it was the NCA that said the turnaround, if you like, for sextortion can be as little as 6 hours. I've heard from police that can be looking less. So if you imagine your young person going to bed at night, at 9 o'clock or whatever, that can all happen while everyone in the house is sleeping. So it can be really tricky for parents and caregivers to pick up on warning signs. So I think a lot of it's about having conversations with your young people and understanding, no matter the time or day, no matter whether you think you're going to get into trouble or whatever else, no matter what, we're here and we want to be woken up and we want you to come and talk to us about this. I think it's about all those kind of constant reassurance messages about the fact that you're in their corner and nothing else matters. You just, you'll fight for them and you love them and you're there for them. So there's not always the same sort of warning signs for sextortion as there is for other forms of exploitation,
And what about in general exploitation?
Well, just to make the point, in general sexual exploitation, the position is reversed, and girls, insofar as we know, because it's all underreported, but the position would be approximately 5 to 1 more likely for girls. But we do know the same trend of younger children being part of this, and in Rotherham it was 11 years old was the kind of the youngest. However, that's not the case across the piece now, and regrettably some of the demand that comes via online is increasingly for very much younger children, including infants and babies, and it's just to add to what you were saying about that, it's worth noting as well that there are perpetrators in the UK who are abusing children online abroad, and that is a hugely difficult problem, as you know. And we are actually third in the world of having the highest consumers of indecent images of children, only exceeded by the USA and Canada. So there's a major problem there, and I noted at one stage a couple of years ago that in one notorious case, it was in Scotland, which is one of the reasons it came to my attention, but that a person was directing, live streaming the parents of a very young, an under 5-year-old online at the direction of the abuser who lived in Scotland for something like £1.50, which is utterly, it's not something that a lot can be done. We know that, it's not easy to identify how you tackle that, but that's the scale of shocking behaviour. We thought at one stage maybe you get credit card companies to do something, but sadly, as with all of online, the providers are only interested in their own business model. Anyway, did you want to ask me something?
Yeah, just about what might be some of the red flags that,
oh yes, of course,
either even teachers as well as parents and carers might identify.
Well, there are an awful lot, and that are subtly different from especially online, but many are similar to what you're describing. But the kinds of things that come up all the time are having money suddenly that you can't identify where they've got it from, the children, and them appearing with new things, and the standard sort of thing there is a new clothes, trainers, or mobile phones in particular, because they're critical to the entire process, whether it's online or offline. A very tricky one is noticing inappropriate sexualised behaviour. Now, to do that for carers of whatever kind, you need to understand what would be standard at a certain age. Yeah. And that's not always that easy, but there's quite a lot of advice about that on the NSPCC website, that what might be normal, and then how it might vary from it. And some of it might be kind of, when I say inappropriate, it could be when a child is a little bit older, behaving as if they were younger and sitting on men's knees, or if they come into the house, becoming very close to them and touching, but a certain level of intimacy that is inappropriate in the circumstances. But that's not the easiest thing to identify. Isolated from the normal friendships, and that could apply in schools with a peer group or whatever. Big issue about going missing from home, huge issue all the time, and the frequency of missing from home and nobody knowing where they've been or what they've been doing. And getting involved in petty crime, not knowing where they are, if they've been trafficked. I use the term traffic not to be abroad, but traffic from one town to another. But the boy or girl concerned actually doesn't know they've come there in a car and they're taken away again. They don't even know where it was. Persistently late, calling older person boyfriend or girlfriend. The age difference is a big issue as well. And contact with any kind of gangs, falling behind with schoolwork, unexplained physical injury, weight loss, and rather more advanced issues around regularly having sexually transmitted infections. And that's very, very awkward. And as I learned in Rotherham, there were good health visitors who would try and inform their colleagues who ran the clinics to say things like, would you leave your phone outside when you come in here? Because it'll interview all made up. But that's because the gang who may have been associated with them were told them to keep their phone on so they could monitor what the young person was saying to the clinicians with whom they were in contact. So there are things that could be done that are quite simple, and maybe that does happen everywhere now. I would doubt it somehow. And of course, pregnancy and termination. I'm terribly sorry. I think that might be my phone. It's gone off in a minute. If you can find it, I thought I'd turned it off. Turn it off. Yeah, no, sorry. I thought I had turned off the sound. It was yours and not somebody else. Anyway, that's the range of things that are indicators, but there are many more, including staying up late at night, constant tiredness, especially with online, is another factor as well.
And you've emphasised, Lyndsay, the importance as parents or carers talking to young people about these issues, which isn't easy. And there must be a lot of stigma attached to, okay, I've been stupid enough to be sextorted, or they'll think I'm not a nice person, that I've been part of this exploitation. And we can go down into the victim blaming when actually they are the victim, not the...
Absolutely.
And how? What's your take on that?
I think we were really clear with the sextortion campaign that couldn't happen, and we had to be really clear about that whole minefield of a topic. When we had spoken, when we were co-producing the campaign with young people, I sort of went into the campaign. I've got teenagers of my own. I've got a 13-year-old at home and my daughter's nearly 16. So my children are my target demographic in work. It's a really strange one. So I do bring my mum hat to an awful lot of what I do. And when I started to create the campaign, I did think that sort of the embarrassment factor of telling your mum that you'd sent an image and, all that kind of stuff, or the kind of the stigma around it and the worries around how can you tell people about this? What will they think of me? That's ultimately what the criminal's hoping for, so that you do make that payment or you do whatever it is that they're asking you to do, because you don't want people to see that image. But one of the things young people said to us, which I think was absolutely critical for our campaign, was the fact that they thought, of course, that wasn't something they would look forward to, and that, of course, would be an awkward situation. They wouldn't really, look forward to that. But their biggest barrier for speaking up and getting help would be the fact that they thought they would get into trouble. they thought that they would get arrested themselves. And I'm sitting there as a mum of teenagers thinking, oh my goodness, like I would hope that would never ever happen. But in their mind, when they go into school or they talk to their parents at home or caregivers or whoever about, you know, online harm and all these different dangers, the one thing that as adults we all do is we tell them that it's against the law to send, share, receive, store intimate images of someone under 18, you know, including themselves. And that is the thing that the young people are taking away from those conversations, not that idea that regardless of whether they send images or not, no one has any right to then extort money or force them to do something else or exploit them in some other way with those images. And I think we have to be really clear about how we're talking about these topics with young people, and to really always have that caveat. It doesn't, no matter, of course, yes, that's the law and that is the way it is, but it's really important to recognise that that doesn't mean to say that you're openly inviting something bad or some harm to come to you. So through the campaign, we worked really closely with Police Scotland to really get that message across to young people and the adults around them, that, you know, if you've been manipulated or forced or tricked, or lots of other words that police put in their, you know, small words, you know, they're kind of wording for it. But if that's happened, you know, you're the victim in all of this, and that's how Police Scotland would treat you. They would never seek to try and criminalise someone in that situation. They're there to hopefully get you justice and to look after you through the process. And that was something that was really important for us to try and get across in the campaign. And again, through the resource we're launching on Monday in schools, very much the case. It's part of the video. We've got police themselves actually saying that, because young people said the only people they'd believe that from is the police themselves. So we've got a lovely sergeant from Cyber, very clear about that, and about the fact that they're there to protect you and look after you and keep you safe. So for me, that is a really important part when we're talking about this. I think we can go into things thinking it's about a stigma or it's about this or that, but unless you're talking to young people and really finding out from them what the barriers are, you know, as adults, when we talk to young people, it's like at home. You think your children know we're all on the same page and we're all, you know, we're thinking along the same lines, and then you find out your teenager's somewhere completely different and thinking something else. So I think it's really important that while all these different sort of trends come around and, you know, developing sort of threats to our young people and to adults as well, while that happens, we need to keep going back to the young people to find out where they stand on it and what their views are on it in terms of barriers or what would support them to get help or to speak up. That's critical.
And what's your experience or learning from Rotherham or other inquiries that why young people themselves aren't telling people about this?
Well, there are a whole long list of barriers to reporting, as we tend to call it in a kind of neutral, professional way, but they're very, very serious. And the focus ought not to be on the child, and the whole system should not rely on the child telling something. It should rely on the adults that surround the child in whatever setting, making it easier and much more possible to be approached about it. As part of the work my public inquiry did, we had set up something called the Truth Project, which was an extraordinary volume of voluntary accounts from people who we made it easy for them to get in contact with us, and they talked to somebody, a trained facilitator, about their experiences of sexual abuse. And one of the most extraordinary things about all of that emerged from it was that from the data that we, with their permission, anonymously put together, was the average length of time it took any person from when the abuse occurred to when they managed to talk to anybody about it, not just people in authority, was 26 years. So there's something wrong with a system where a child under 18s, of course, at the time that occurred, was terrified of telling anybody about it, and it's for very similar reasons to what you're talking about. And there's also, I would say, it is the most taboo subject as child sexual abuse. We actually got somebody else to conduct a survey general population survey about what were taboo subjects, and it came top of the list ahead of money troubles and marriage troubles that people found difficult to talk to others about. So it's kind of an interesting taboo, and why it's most important that we use the proper terminology for everything that actually happens to children. Because it's, people could, somebody described it to me once as like, it thought it was just a bit of adolescent fumbling. Now, actually, what we're talking about is rape, penetration by objects, and oral and anal sex, and a whole range of things. And we just need to use the language and describe it, because we don't do that when somebody's, has experienced serious injury and other forms of criminality. But it does apply here. It's surrounded by secrecy and difficulty in talking about it. Mm-hmm. And it should not be on the child to somehow overcome that. Yeah. And the very worst thing of all, and one of the reasons we recommended something called mandatory reporting, which you may well have heard about, was when and if a child plucked up the courage to talk to someone they thought was a trusted adult, they did so, and they expected the abuse to stop, and it didn't. And how that actually, in many cases, meant that they had a lifelong distrust of people in authority, such as teachers, social workers, police, or anybody else, care workers.
Can I go back to something you said in a previous answer when you said you might spot that a young person was behaving sexually more advanced or inappropriately? And I've read surveys that more and more young people are accessing pornography online. Yeah. Does that give them a warped view of what sex should be like?
That's a very good question, and actually there is a bit of research about that as well, that the open access that we were discussing on the internet has also meant that more and more children and young people are getting their information about what's appropriate and what isn't from looking at adult pornography. And it's led to the most appalling kind of behavioural changes, or what is accepted. And you may have heard about this recently. Somehow or other, there's been a huge increase in the the activity of whoever the partner is, male or female, being subjected to choking. And that's become very shocking. And much of that is derived from adult pornography and how vivid this all is, and the creeping acceptability of what is appropriate sexual behaviour without recognising what the actual risks would be. Just one other point about that. I can't see how... I'll call it sex education classes because it's the simplest way of describing it, how well, what it's now like in, for example, in Scottish schools. I hope it's a lot better than it once was. But certainly in the time when I was in Rotherham, we talked to young people and they say, well, it's all about reducing teenage pregnancies. That's all that people in authority are interested in, was reducing the numbers. And they were so bored with it, and they said you'd learn nothing. They wanted to talk about issues like being gay or not, and how could you tell, and when's the right time to, the uncertainties around the age range from 12 onwards, and probably nowadays it will be primary school age. But they were very exasperated by the quality of personal and relationship and sexual education in schools, and I do hope it's moved on from that stage. But that trained people actually tackle these subjects in a much more open way that encourages discussion about what is and isn't acceptable, and how it could be risky.
Yeah, and we were talking about, well, what can carers and parents do? I mean, a number of people said to us in the online event, well, I only found out because I looked at my daughter's phone, for example. And it might come up in our Q&A later, but is that okay to take your child's phone and look through it and check what they're doing?
That seems to be the most controversial question in Scotland at the moment. Before this, we were talking about the fact I was at another panel for someone, and there was about, I think, 6 of us on the panel, and I had a different view to everyone else, and it was because I was speaking as a mum. So again, I speak as a mum. I wouldn't let my children just walk out the house at 2 o'clock in the morning and go to Glasgow without me knowing what they're doing, and clearly in danger in the middle of the night, and all the kind of risk factor of that just sends me as a mum. So I think I've got every right to make sure that I keep them safe, and I've got a responsibility to keep them safe online as well. I think it's about how we do that, though. I think clearly young people have got. We should be respecting their rights, and whether that's our right to privacy or their right to anything else, of course we should uphold that. And as adults, we should all be doing our best to uphold those rights as much as possible. Of course we do. So I think it's about how we have conversations with our young people, whether it's when they first get their first mobile phone. It feels like the children just get a phone now. It's not even a big deal as much. It's not like when they go to first years, and there's no. We're not really giving our young people much information when they get their first phone, and we know that children are getting their first phone so much younger now. So I think it's about setting expectations when we start that and we give them access online or give them their first phone. We need to have conversations around what's acceptable and what's not as parents and caregivers. For me, that can mean lots of things. Like my daughter's phones go off at 9 o'clock at night. They don't come on again until 7 o'clock in the morning. That's just the way it is. And to be fair, they've never questioned it. Occasionally, if they're running late coming back from dance, they ask me to sort of unblock their phone or whatever so that they can, have some time in the car on it or whatever. And that's fine. And, wherever they ask me for something, generally speaking, I say yes unless I've got a very good reason. So we're not locking horns over this. It's not a continual battle. It's just that's how it started, and that's the expectations we've had from the very kind of word go all the way through to where my daughter's coming up for 16 now. And I think in some ways they like it, because it means where group chats are kicking off and all sorts of mad things are getting said on it, everyone knows that their crazy mum doesn't let them have their phone after 9 o'clock, so they can't be part of that. So in some ways, there's that element where they know that they can sort of say, oh, well, my mum just doesn't let me, or my dad. But generally, I'm the bad cop. So I think that's really important. I don't think it's about overriding your child's right to privacy and their right to being online or having phones or whatever. It's about how you balance that as a family unit, and how they understand that anything that you're putting in, any measures you're putting in, it's to look after them and to keep them safe. Mm-hmm. And I think it needs to accompany. You can't just give children rules. You also have to support them with the knowledge to be able to make positive choices for themselves as well. So that's where hopefully our campaigns came in over the past sort of 9 months or so. Our information on our websites for young people, and young people can look through that information. We've had lots of TikToks and Snapchat ads and equipping young people with knowledge of what sextortion is. But at the same time, we've had that differentiated comms piece for adults who work with and look after young people so that they know as well. But I think it's really hard as a parent or carer right now, because you're constantly trying to balance what is okay. Am I allowed to do that? None of us, I'm not quite 40 yet. And I had my first mobile phone, I think, when I was about 15 or 14 or 15, but we didn't have any Snapchat or TikTok or social media platforms then. So even as a reasonably youngish parent, I've never did this before. I've not seen what it's like to parent through a time where we've got constant access to people all over the world and they've got constant access to us. So I think we're all still learning as to how to do that. But I think we need to make sure we're really empowering our parents and carers to know what's possible and to feel that they can keep their young people safe in an online space as much as possible, in the same way they would in a public space or in the city centre, I think we need to do better at really encouraging them to understand that they can do that, and there's ways to do that. It's not always successful. Harm happens. You know, you can't, it's very difficult to prevent every single possibility of harm, but there's lots of things that you can do to hopefully equip them to be able to navigate that harm should it ever come up. And I think that's the conversation we need to be having.
And you talked about the importance of mobile phones and child sexual exploitation. Is there more that schools, parents could be doing to prevent that, or do they hide them?
It's obviously a very, very complex subject, as you say, and there are very divided views on it. I can only say I hope this has been eradicated, but I heard of it both in Rotherham and in Glasgow, that mother of an exploited girl, who the mother had given her the phone, obviously, and paid for it, etc. And she had taken it off the daughter once it became clear that she had been a victim. And it contained names, phone numbers, and of the perpetrators, plus the nature of the sexual activity that took place. Anyway, the police refused to use it at that stage because of saying that it was a breach of the person's human rights. And that struck me as bizarre. And then, of course, I later came to doing a session in Glasgow, and I heard exactly the same kind of story being reported. Now, well, I don't think I know where I would stand on that. There has to be some kind of compulsion about it. If it gets to the point that the police are trying to prosecute someone who has carried out alleged criminality of that nature, that kind of information is invaluable. And I'm afraid at that point I would say, sorry, it's the individual's rights need to be overridden to deal with these things. I don't know if that has subsequently happened.
Yeah. One of the things that I didn't know about that you talked about in the online talk was there are tools to remove images from the internet that young people can use or parents can use, and they're on your website. Is that right?
Yeah, so when I had first, as I say, I've got no police background. And so when we start new campaigns, I'm very much starting afresh as any parent or comms person would be. And we had this I had a kind of input from Police Scotland telling me all about it and what it looks like both here and kind of internationally, sextortion. And the way sextortion comes across, I think, in the press sometimes, or when we're talking about it, is this brand new thing, and it's it's developing threat, and it's all this brand new, and it's online and it's digital, and it's this The reality is there's lots of services already in place to help young people and to help parents and carers and professionals navigate the topic. I kind of went into it with absolute fear that there would be nothing there, and thinking, gosh, who on earth do I signpost to, and who on earth do I encourage people to go to? But the reality is, there's lots of services there. For our campaign, we very much talk about Childline as a really important option for young people to be able to contact them and get that confidential sort of support and guidance through the topics. Our sort of main message for sextortion was don't panic, don't peer comply, and get help. And so we were obviously very keen to establish who should they get help from. So of course that's a trusted adult, it's a police officer, going to police directly, or Childline was our other option. But there's also there's the Report Remove tool, which is a service by the Internet Watch Foundation and Childline. And through the Report Remove tool, young people can, if there is a service for children under the age of 18, it's not for adults, there's other services similar for adults, but if they have had an image shared or they believe there's an image out there that is of them and it's a nude or semi-nude image, they can use the Report Remove tool at the IWF. It's a website, and they use that website. They are prompted through the website to upload the image and share it, and so that they can, the Internet Watch Foundation can look at it and establish whether it's an image of a child and an under 18, and then that image is then hopefully in most cases removed from the internet, and also that there's markers placed on that image so that if that image is re-uploaded to the internet again, 6 months from now or 3 weeks from now or whatever it might be, that image will hopefully be prevented from being shared online further because of the markers on the image. So things like that are really important, and the fact that the service is really crucial for young people to know about, because some young people, no matter how much reassurance you as a parent or carer or professional give them, they might not want to come and talk to you about it. They simply just might not be willing to do that. So the report remove tool is something that they can do off their own back, on a computer or on their phone, and no one will ever speak to them about it. There's lots of prompts as they use the service to contact Childline or to click through to speak to an advisor, all those kind of different things, or chat online with Childline or what have you. But they don't need to. They can go through the whole process of having that image removed from an online space without speaking to people. And that's important, because if that idea of speaking to people is the thing holding you back, then you need another opportunity to still be able to be empowered to get that image off online. So yeah, the report remove tool we have links to on our website, as we do with Childline and a variety of other organisations. There's also the Children First support line that I've been talking about a lot recently. It's brilliant in terms of parent and carers having a wee bit of support to navigate these conversations. It's easy for me to say, well, as soon as my girls got their phone, we did this and we did that, and there was that expectation set, throughout. But equally, I've been a supported carer for a young person who's in his 20s now. He lived with us for 6 years, and those guys, he didn't come with that idea of this is the expectation of having this mobile phone. He was using his mobile phone kind of constantly, and it can be really hard not to be starting from scratch at that point. But maybe whether it's your own young person or, a young person you're looking after, can sometimes be hard to sort of rein it all back in. Or if it's just gone too far and you're thinking, Jings, we need to change things here, sometimes that can be really hard. And the support line at Children First is a really good tool to be able to talk through with someone and get a wee bit of guidance and help around how to navigate that. So I've been talking about their service as well.
And we're here today raising this issue, raising awareness. But is there more as a society or as a group of interested people we can do to try to, if not prevent, reduce child sexual exploitation?
Well, for me, the answer it would solve a lot of problems. Regrettably, the nature of it is so hidden and so secretive, and I've mentioned this already, the response of society may or may not have become more open. I don't know, but it definitely needs to be open to understanding and making it easier and for people, so that children feel confident to talk to anybody in authority. And actually, I don't just mean those in what we call, regulated activity, but also those who are under the 2003 Act as positions of trust, like who may or may not have committed such offences. But in that respect, we're talking about sports coaches, priests, a whole range of people who are not, care workers or foster carers or regulated in that sense, but where children are also potentially very vulnerable. And they're just one of the big messages about institutions and their behaviours, and I mean every kind of institution, including the church, including Westminster, and a whole range of others that we looked at, schools, is the desire to cover up and manage the problem in their own way and keep it within, the institutional family, which is truly shocking and appallingly. You would get parents who say their family history was that their dad went to a school or their granddad went to a certain school and they were active in the schools, activities, etc. Not to take it outside that, not to do what they should do, which is immediately talk to the police or social work services about it, which is of course what they must and ought to do. And of course, it's one of the reasons why there's the one of our final recommendations was about that. And there is a bill before Parliament about that, and about anybody who prevents an individual employee or volunteer or whoever it is who identifies this kind of thing going on and wants to do it, asks the senior person, their boss in some circumstances, and they say, no, we'll sort it out ourselves. So there's an awful lot of stuff like that. It's very difficult, in my opinion, for child sexual exploitation and abuse more generally to prevent it. Almost everything you ever hear about it is where the risk has been identified after the actual abuse has occurred. So often that children in these circumstances are considered to be at risk, but they might be at risk of more abuse, but they've nearly always been abused already by the time it reaches anyone in a position to do something about it.
We're coming to the end of the panel session, and there'll be a chance for Q&A. But just before we do that, is there anything, Lyndsay, you'd hope to say that I haven't asked you about? Or
I think just to kind of follow on from Alexis' answer to your last question, Linda, I think when it comes to online sextortion and other forms of, harm online, I think it's really important that we as adults also take on a responsibility to ensuring that the social media platforms are doing as much as they possibly can to keep our children safe online. The Online Safety Act has just kind of came into force. That's a wonderful piece of legislation that will hopefully really make the online, world a wee bit safer. But I think things are constantly moving and developing, and there's all these different platforms and all these different things, and things can trend as well. Where something isn't maybe popular today, it could very possibly explode and be popular tomorrow. So I think it's about us as consumers and as adults making sure that the online, the social media companies are doing everything in their power to keep our children and young people safe. There's lots of teams within. I know there's a team in TikTok and Snapchat and all the other ones who do lots of work, and they're constantly trying to develop better practice to sort of pick up on sort of trending, social media platforms or handles or images being shared or what have you, or sort of trending words or whatever. And they're constantly trying to sort of keep on top of that. But I think it seems to me that there's lots more that they could do, and real investment that they can continue to sort of fill that with and try and make it that bit safer. And their kind of, their interaction with crime agencies as well, police forces up and down the country and abroad as well. How are the social media companies helping them to catch the people behind sextortion and other forms of online harm? How are the social media companies really equipping those police forces to be able to do that adequately and quickly? So I think there's lots more good work that could be done. But I think it's about reassuring adults that there are services there, and there's lots of resources there for you to learn more about sextortion or other crimes, and there's lots of resources for schools. As I say, we've got a new resource launching on Monday. It's a sort of short version of the resource. Teachers had sort of said to us that there's COP resources and there's various other organisations, but the curriculum is so jam-packed. It can be really hard to talk about absolutely everything. I mean, how can you do that in a school day when you've also got English and maths and all the other subjects? So hopefully our new resource that's been created alongside young people is short and it's flexible, and it's just a short video and then some facilitator notes, and even if it's just a way into the conversation, and then the kind of more thorough resources can be used at some point as well in the future. But it's just to reassure you that whilst extortion feels huge and feels really difficult to try and navigate, the reality is there's services there, there's support there, and there's lots of information there to help you have those important conversations with your children and young people.
Yeah, thank you. And any last point you want to make?
Yes. Okay. I'm not sure I stress this enough, really, but the devastating impact on children into adulthood and lifelong impact that child sexual abuse and exploitation can have. It affects so many different aspects of their lives. As I say, it could take many years before they actually are able to share what's happened and get the help that they really should have had years earlier. But the oldest person in the Truth Project that it came to, that I mentioned earlier, that was part of the public inquiry, was 87. Gosh. And apart from telling his wife about it, he had never shared it with anybody else, and nor had he actually left the house on his own. And all of it started at the age of 12 for this man. But that's just an illustration of how far-reaching these kinds of impacts can be, and then there's the other things like social isolation, unemployment, and education, missing out on so much of that, acquiring a criminal record, which actually victims in certain circumstances have done, becoming addicted because they had been fed, in terms of sexual exploitation, with drugs or alcohol. And as a means of control, they were more easily controlled if they were dependent on drugs or alcohol, and of course problems with relationships all the way through. It doesn't all happen to everybody. There are survivors where the story is different, but usually there are some of these features that are present for survivors of child sexual exploitation.
Well, our time for this bit is coming to an end, and thank you to you both. It's been immensely informative, if sometimes quite distressing, to hear about these things, but you've also said, what resources are there and how we can get help. We're going to stop the recording now so that we can have a Q&A, and you'll feel able to ask any questions or share your own experience. But just again to say thank you to both of our panel members. Mm-hmm. Thanks so much for joining us today. I hope this chat resonated with you, and you can find more conversations like this, along with the details of our live events and free resources, at carevisionsfostering.co.uk. So until next time, take care of yourself and those that you love.